5:46 in the morning, January 17, 1995. The port city of Kobe, Japan, is asleep. In 20 seconds, that will not matter. The ground beneath Hyogo Prefecture tears sideways along a fault line most residents have never heard of. Buildings rated to survive an earthquake do not survive this one. A concrete highway carrying tens of thousands of cars a day snaps at its base and falls onto its side, whole, for over 600 meters. More than 6,400 people will be dead before the week is out. 99.9% of the people in the affected area will survive the shaking itself. And then a different kind of disaster begins, one made of fire, collapsed rescue routes, and a government that does not send in the army for 9 hours. What actually happened in those 20 seconds? And why did a country famous for earthquake engineering get caught so completely off guard? To understand that, we have to go back to the night before. Kobe, in January of 1995, is not a sleepy town. It is one of the busiest port cities on the planet, handling roughly 12% of Japan's entire export trade. Its skyline sits wedged between the Rokko mountain range and Osaka Bay, a narrow strip of reclaimed land and dense neighborhoods packed with over 1.4 million people. To the west lies Osaka, to the northeast, the smaller resort city of Nishinomiya, and together, the whole urban corridor is known as the Hanshin region, home to more than 11 million people. Japan sits at the meeting point of 4 tectonic plates, and its engineers know this better than almost anyone on Earth. After decades of earthquakes, the country has built a reputation as the gold standard in seismic-resistant construction. Steel-reinforced concrete, elevated highways engineered to flex, not break. A national confidence, quietly reinforced by codes rewritten and strengthened after every previous disaster, that the big infrastructure would hold even if smaller buildings did not. Beneath the northern tip of nearby Awaji Island runs the Nojima Fault, a strike-slip fracture that has been building pressure for centuries. It has not ruptured in living memory. There is no active public warning system flagging it as an imminent threat. Life in Kobe on the evening of January 16th is completely ordinary. Commuter trains run on schedule. Bakeries prepare dough for the morning rush. In the working-class district of Nagata, dense with old wooden houses and small family-run workshops, families go to sleep exactly as they always have. It is, in almost every sense, a city built with confidence, and about to have that confidence tested at its foundations. There is no siren, no last-minute alert. Japan's earthquake monitoring network in 1995 is sophisticated by global standards, but the Nojima Fault produces no meaningful foreshock sequence that anyone flags as a precursor to what is coming. Seismologists will later describe the event as a shallow and direct hit, a phrase that, in hindsight, explains almost everything about why the damage was so catastrophic. The fault's rupture point sits only around 16 kilometers beneath the surface, and its epicenter is barely 20 kilometers from the heart of one of the most densely populated urban corridors in the world. That proximity is the warning nobody could act on in time. Distance is what usually blunts an earthquake's force by the time it reaches a city. Kobe would get almost none of that buffer. At 5:46 in the morning, most of the region is still in bed. Convenience stores are just beginning their early shift changeovers. The gap between how normal the morning looks and what is about to happen beneath everyone's feet could not be wider. The rupture begins beneath Awaji Island and tears along the fault for roughly 20 seconds. 20 seconds. That is the entire duration of the shaking that will reshape Kobe for the next 2 decades. The magnitude registers at 6.9 on the moment magnitude scale, 7.3 on the Japanese intensity conversion, enough to hit the maximum reading on Japan's own seismic intensity scale, a level so severe it is rarely recorded in a populated area. Ground acceleration peaks at nearly 1 full G-force, strong enough to momentarily throw objects, furniture, and people into the air. The Hanshin Expressway Route 3, the elevated highway carrying 40% of all road traffic between Osaka and Kobe, twists sideways under the force. 10 spans across 3 separate locations buckle and collapse. In one section, spanning roughly 635 meters, the entire elevated roadway tips over and falls onto its side, intact, like a toy knocked off a shelf. Cars are still on it when it falls. 12 people inside those vehicles do not survive. Below ground, the Daikai subway station, believed to be one of the safest structures in the city, collapses inward, crushing sections of the road above it. Bullet train lines are damaged in 36 separate locations along a 56-mile stretch of track. Kobe's port, handling that 12% of the nation's exports, sinks by as much as 10 feet in places and shuts down almost entirely. And then come the fires. Toppled kerosene heaters and gas stoves, standard in Japanese homes during January, ignite almost instantly in the collapsed wooden housing stock of Nagata Ward. Within minutes, roughly 100 fires are burning across the city. Within 1 to 2 hours, several of them merge into large-scale conflagrations. Over 300 fires eventually break out citywide, at least a dozen of them major blazes. Firefighters are dispatched from as far away as Tokyo. But the roads they need are gone, buried under rubble, blocked by the same collapsed highways meant to move people quickly through the city. Fire crews reach some blazes on foot, dragging equipment past crushed houses, because no vehicle can get through. By the time the fires are contained, more than 7,400 buildings have burned to the ground. In Nagata Ward, entire blocks of wooden houses, many of them decades old, home to elderly residents and small manufacturing families, simply pancake under the weight of collapsing upper floors. Rescue in this district is not a matter of cranes and heavy equipment. For the first critical hours, it is neighbors, with bare hands and hand tools, pulling at broken timber and roof tiles, trying to reach people they can hear but cannot see. Officials would later calculate that the overwhelming majority of people pulled alive from the wreckage in the first day were rescued not by professional emergency crews, but by ordinary residents working alongside them, often before organized rescue teams could even reach the neighborhood. The 9-hour delay before the Japanese government authorizes a military deployment becomes one of the most scrutinized failures of the entire disaster. Traffic gridlock, caused by the very highway collapses that defined the earthquake, then slows even that delayed response to a crawl. For families trapped under rubble in those critical early hours, help that should have arrived in minutes instead measures itself in hours. An estimated 300,000 people are left homeless by nightfall. Roughly 70,000 of them are still living in emergency shelters 2 months later. Some displaced residents will not leave temporary housing until the year 2000. The disaster does not end when the shaking stops, or even when the fires burn out. In the days and weeks that follow, hundreds of additional deaths are eventually linked back to the earthquake. From injuries, from the collapse of medical infrastructure, from the strain of survival itself. Officials would come to recognize roughly 920 of these as quake-related fatalities, on top of the toll from the disaster's first hours. When the final count is in, the Great Hanshin Earthquake, as it becomes officially known, has killed over 6,400 people and injured more than 40,000. It is the deadliest earthquake to strike Japan since the Great Kanto Earthquake of 1923, more than 70 years earlier. Economic losses are eventually estimated at somewhere between $100 and $200 billion, making it, at the time, one of the costliest natural disasters in modern history. Over 100,000 houses are completely destroyed. As many as 460,000 more are damaged. The engineering failure is, in some ways, the most sobering part of the story. Investigators determine that most of the collapsed highway sections were not built illegally or carelessly. They were built exactly to the codes in force during the 1960s. Those codes had already been recognized as inadequate and revised multiple times since, most recently in 1981. But the revisions only applied to new construction. The old spans, technically legal when they were built, had simply never been retrofitted. That single fact reshapes Japanese infrastructure policy. Existing bridges and elevated highways across the country are re-evaluated and retrofitted on an accelerated timeline. Japan's seismic building codes are tightened further. The disaster also becomes the catalyst for a change in Japanese civil society itself. The flood of ordinary citizens who traveled to Kobe to volunteer, with no formal system to organize them, leads directly to Japan passing its first non-profit organization law just 3 years later, in 1998. 1995 is still remembered in Japan as the country's year one of organized civilian volunteering. The rebuilding of the Hanshin Expressway alone takes 20 months, employs an estimated 2.5 million workers, and uses over 93,000 tons of steel. Kobe's port did eventually recover, fully restored by early 1997. But some of the western wards hit hardest by the quake never returned to their pre-disaster population. Nagata, in particular, still bears the scars of that morning in its emptier lots and older demographics. A district that lost not just buildings, but the people who might have rebuilt them. Japan still sits exactly where it did on January 17, 1995, at the junction of four tectonic plates, carrying some of the densest urban populations on the planet, directly on top of fault lines that can rupture with no meaningful warning. The lesson Kobe taught the world, that being legally built is not the same as being safe, has been applied to codes and retrofits across the globe ever since. But somewhere beneath a city, right now, there is a fault line that has not moved in centuries either. Thank you so much for watching and for supporting this channel while I research and put together stories like this one. If you enjoyed it, a like and a subscribe genuinely help more than you'd think. Thanks to everyone who's already part of this community. I appreciate you more than you know. Stay alert, and I'll see you in the next one.